Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer. And this video is another in our series covering revisions to the statewide forms that took effect March 3rd, 2021. And this video, we are covering Form 35E, the Escalation Addendum. And if you've ever heard me talk about the Escalation Addendum before, I always tell you, use Form 35E as a negotiation tool if the parties want to do that. But when it comes time to document the purchase price on either Form 21 or in a counteroffer. And the reason that is important is because the form has always left a lot of opportunity, and it's not because of a fault in the form, it's because the Escalation Addendum is a form that says from buyer to seller, I want to buy your property so badly, I don't really care what the purchase price is. You pick the purchase price, seller. Here's the least it can be and here's the most it can be, but anywhere in between there, seller, go for it, you pick. Tie it to a competing offer, and I'll define what a competing offer is, but seller, you pick. So what the buyer is asking the seller to do through the Escalation Addendum is really kind of a crazy negotiation, contractual negotiation operation anyway, but that's why the form, it leaves so much room for ambiguity. Okay, that aside, the revised Form 35E eliminates a lot of the room for ambiguity because it requires the parties to communicate immediately after mutual acceptance if they don't agree with one another about how the price was escalated. Even so, by the end of this video, I'm going to tell you again, I still think it's a good idea for you to use the Form 35E as a negotiation tool, but document the price by agreement of the parties, either on a Form 21 or in a counteroffer. All right, so how was the form revised? Well, one of the things that wasn't revised, but it's really important for you to know, is that when a seller escalates the purchase price using a Form 35E, the seller must include a copy of the competing offer, the offer that was used to escalate buyer's price. That's the competing offer. That's a defined term in the Form 35E. That must be provided back to buyer along with seller's acceptance that escalates the purchase price. Listing brokers, if you don't include a copy of that competing offer, the price does not escalate. This is a big deal in listing brokers. If you just forget to include the competing offer, the price does not escalate. The buyer's original purchase price is the purchase price at closing. You cannot forget to attach the competing offer. One of the questions I got a lot when teaching this class is how do we attach the offer if we have a data capacity on our email that won't allow us to attach both seller's acceptance of buyer's offer and the competing offer? The one suggestion that I came up with, and I'm sure there are a lot of other technological solutions like Dropbox or something like that, about which I know nothing. The one thing that I'm technologically sophisticated enough to know how to do is to email. And so I would use two emails and I would identify them as seller's acceptance email 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. And on that email 1 of 2, I would attach the competing offer. And then 2 of 2, I would send over immediately thereafter seller's acceptance of buyer's Form 35E offer. Okay, we still haven't gotten to the revisions in the form. The revisions in the form are this. When buyer receives seller's acceptance and escalated price, buyer, you have exactly 3 days to review the competing offer that comes back with seller's acceptance and determine whether or not the competing offer that seller used to escalate your price meets the definition of competing offer as you defined competing offer in the boilerplate language of paragraph 2, Form 35E. Form 35E boilerplate language defines a competing offer to include essentially, has to be bona fide, has to be cash to seller at closing, it may not include a Form 22B home sale contingency, and the closing date by default has to be no more than 60 days, but that's the one provision that buyer can modify. Buyer can make the competing offer have a closing date of 20, 30, 40, whatever days works for buyer. Buyer fills in the blank in paragraph 2 of Form 35E to define competing offer to include a closing date less than 60 days. Okay, Buyer gets the seller's acceptance, the escalated price, the competing offer. Buyer reviews that competing offer, and buyer has exactly 3 days to object. If buyer looks at seller's competing offer and says, this doesn't meet the definition of competing offer. My definition of competing offer says that the transaction had to close in not less than 30 days. This transaction will close in 45 days. It's not a competing offer. It could not justify an escalation of the purchase price. The revised 35E says, buyer, you must use a brand new notice form, 35EN, and deliver notice back to the seller that the competing offer doesn't meet the definition of competing offer. Upon receipt of that notice from buyer, seller has exactly 2 days to do one of two things. Seller can do nothing at all, and if seller does nothing at all, then the transaction will close at buyer's original unescalated purchase price, because seller will be accepting that the competing offer was not a competing offer and couldn't escalate the purchase price. The other choice that seller has is to terminate the agreement. So buyer, you have 3 days to object and say it's not a competing offer. Once those 3 days have passed, even if it's not a competing offer, you no longer can object. You've got 3 days following receipt of seller's escalated purchase price. Seller, you've got 2 days to respond after you receive buyer's notice. All of these responses, all of these notices back and forth are set forth on the 35EN. Okay, move forward in 35E to the second page, and you get to the calculation tool that seller will use to calculate the escalated purchase price. Buyer broker, when you get the acceptance back from seller with that calculation tool filled in and establishing the new escalated purchase price, buyer, you have exactly 3 days to redo your own math, and if you disagree with seller's math and you think the price is lower based on the math problem, then buyer, you use 35EN again. You do your own calculations on 35EN using the calculation tool there. And within those 3 days, you deliver it back to seller, objecting to seller's escalated purchase price. Seller, same thing. Within 2 days, or not more than 2 days, following receipt of buyer's notice, seller can do one of two things. Nothing, which means that the parties will close the transaction at buyer's recalculated purchase price, escalated price, or seller can terminate the agreement. All right, that's it. Those are the changes to Form 35E. So you can see where, with the negotiation back and forth and buyer being able to object and then seller being able to respond, that we eliminate, by cutoff deadlines, we eliminate the ambiguity of what the price might actually be at the closing table. We're going to know for sure what the price is going to be at the closing table, but it doesn't mean that the calculation is going to have been done right. It doesn't mean that we have taken properly into account all of the variables. I still say, brokers, the best thing you can do in this situation is use the 35E to escalate the price as a negotiation. Listing broker, pick up the phone, call the buyer broker. Buyer broker, here's a competing offer. I'm going to send it over to you in the form of a PDF. Take a look at it. I believe this would escalate the purchase price to $500,000. If you agree with me, then my seller would be happy to sell it to your buyer at $500,000. Why don't you send a purchase and sale agreement back to me? All of the other terms that your buyer offered are fine. Just raise the price to $500,000. My seller will accept that. Or if seller's going to send over a counteroffer, that's fine too. But reach agreement, use the competing offer to justify what seller is doing. That's an act of professionalism. And then reach agreement by the parties as to the purchase price, document it, close the transaction. No more ambiguities. If you have questions on that or anything else, send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.